Serhii Plokhy, and I am Communications Director for the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, a Canadian charitable nonprofit organization. UJE was launched in 2008 with the goal of strengthening mutual comprehension and solidarity between Ukrainians and Jews, two peoples who have lived on the territory of modern-day Ukraine for over a millennium. Among our initiatives is the support of literary festivals. These fairs have offered participants the opportunity to engage in a broad interethnic dialogue by discussing publications supported by UJE, as well as those books that strengthen and affirm the values we share. A principal partner for us is the Lviv International BookForum, Ukraine's largest literary festival. For 7 years now, we've enjoyed exploring a wide range of books dedicated to the Ukrainian-Jewish relationship. Typically, this education has taken place in auditoriums large and small in the beautiful Western Ukrainian city of Lviv, designated a UNESCO City of Literature. This year is different. We are meeting online, not in person. Despite many challenges, the BookForum's organizers were determined the festival should take place virtually. We are glad they have succeeded in this. I'm delighted to say this panel is taking place within the framework of the 27th Lviv International BookForum with the support of the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter and the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation. This year's format offers an opportunity to bring the BookForum and UJE's program to a wider audience with some of the greatest thinkers about Ukrainian Jewish relations, Yaroslav Hrytsak, Wolf Moskovich, and Serhii Plokhy, who join us respectively from Lviv, Jerusalem, and Boston. Titled Ukrainians and Jews in the World of Ivan Franko, the panel will be conducted in English. Its genesis lies in an essay about Ivan Franko and Ze'ev Jabotinsky by Dr. Moskovich, and the English language translation of Dr. Hrytsak's book, Ivan Franko and His Community. A few words about our participants. Considered one of Ukraine's leading intellectuals, Dr. Hrytsak is professor of the Department of Modern and Contemporary History of Ukraine at the Ukrainian Catholic University, visiting professor of the Central European University, and honorary professor at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Dr. Moskovich is professor emeritus of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, a foreign member of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, and editor-in-chief of the groundbreaking book series, Jews and Slavs. An award-winning writer, Dr. Plokhy is the Mikhailo Khrushchevsky Professor of Ukrainian History and the director of the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard University. Drs. Moskovich and Plokhy are members of UJE's Board of Directors, while Dr. Hrytsak is a member of our organization's Academic Council. I now turn the panel over to Dr. Plokhy.
Thank you very much, Natana. It's my honor and pleasure to chair and moderate the work that normally goes to the chair. So my work now is really very easy, and I look really forward to a very interesting and informative discussion. I looked at the work. Again, I read some of them before, looked again at the works of our two distinguished presenters today, Yaroslav Hrytsak and Wolf Moskovich, and really got to me on a different level the importance of the topic that we are going to discuss today, because there is no need to really talk much about the importance of Ukrainian Jewish relationship for the history and for contemporary developments and for the future of our two peoples and two nations. But I really didn't realize until I looked at the works of Professors Hrytsak and Moskovich that Ivan Franko is actually the author, Ukrainian author, who wrote the most on the Jews and on the Jewish community and the topic of Ukrainian Jewish relationship, and got relatively little attention in academic discourse, in scholarly discussions. And from that point of view, this panel is certainly a contribution to that, an attempt to fill the void that has been there for too long. Well, the task of the panel is really to put Ivan Franko in a multiple contexts. He certainly belongs to many of those contexts. He wrote in Ukrainian, he wrote in Polish, he wrote in German. But as comparison of his life writings and his approaches with Ze'ev, Jabotinsky will show his world was not really limited only to the world of the Austria-Hungary. He was someone who was speaking to the issues and to the audiences that crossed those borders and boundaries, included certainly the Ukrainian lands of the Russian Empire. Look at Franko through that perspective, but also comparing him and his views to the views of Jabotinsky presents a number of challenges, but also offers a number of opportunities that I'm sure will not miss. The challenges come from the fact not only that those two figures lived and wrote and discussed those views in different empires, but also because there is a certain chronological asynchronism in their lives and in their works. Franko, his contribution to the public discourse comes from the last quarter of the 19th century and the first roughly 15 years of the 20th century. When we look at Jabotinsky, he really enters the adult world of politics at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, and then writes all the way through the good part of the first half of the 20th century. But this asynchronism is also a characteristic of the developments of relationship between Ukrainian and the Jews in the two empires, in the Russian Empire and Austria-Hungary. Let's look at a couple of major developments and put them on the chronological table. So the emancipation of the Serbs in Austria-Hungary happens 1848, in the Russian Empire it's 1861. The Jews in Austria-Hungary acquire equal rights by 1860s, when attempts to give any rights to the Jews in the Russian Empire, in particular the Kingdom of Poland, really ends up in the policies of exclusion. The political processes, and the election to the parliament, an extremely important part of political life, start in Austria-Hungary, of course, after the revolution of 1848, and in the Russian Empire only in 1905. But what that also meant was that, given that these two figures come from different empires in different contexts, it's whether there was asynchronism in their lives or in the developments, very often they addressed actually the same issues, the big issues, and those issues were the rise of mass politics. The issues were the idea of Ukrainian and Jewish states. So I really, from that point of view, I think that we hit it on something really very important here in terms of the comparative look and broad look at the life and writings of Franko in comparison with another major figure. So again, I want to repeat that I'm very, very honored to moderate this discussion. In terms of the way how we'll proceed after this introduction is that I will ask first Professor Hrytsak to talk maybe for approximately 10 minutes, and then we will turn this virtual mic to Professor Moskovich. And after that, I prepared a couple of questions. We'll start with those questions, but we will see where the discussion will lead us, and I'm absolutely sure that it will lead us in very interesting, intellectually interesting places. So with that, I'm turning the floor to Professor Hrytsak.
Thank you so much, Professor Plokhy. Thank you, Natalia, for inviting me for this discussion. I feel very honored and flattered. It's very nice to be such a distinguished academic company. And I would like to start with a question: why do we really care about Franko? Why Franko is that much important in the issue of the Ukrainian Jewish relation? And I would ask this question in a simple way, that probably there is no other author, Ukrainian author, who treated the Jewish issue in such a systematic and detailed way. That's not to say there's no other Ukrainian authors who address the Jewish issues, but there's mostly was some fragments and snippets here and there. Franko is probably the first, and I hate to say the only, Ukrainian author that dealt with the Jewish issue in such a systematic way. I would dare to say that his attitude to Jewish question, to his Jewish issue, to a large extent, is a paradigmatic. Actually, he elaborated and defined the paradigm, how Ukrainians should address the Jews and vice versa. So I believe, therefore, if you want to discuss Ukrainian-Jewish relations in general, the first figure to start with would be exactly Ivan Franko. My impression is that the whole discussion after his death, which was more like 100 years ago, what we do, we just commented his text and we just footnoted it and put some margins, comments on his margins. But basically, we don't change that much what he already has elaborated. So again, he is very paradigmatic. That said, he is also very pragmatic. And not just academic kind of elaboration with this, it's a very pragmatic oriented issues, how it should be implemented, say, in the political realm, but not the political and cultural and so on and so forth. Let me just make a short digression here. Let me remind some episode that occurred exactly 10 years ago. In 2010, there is a great controversy in Vienna. Local citizen of Jewish origin who came from Soviet Ukraine, Emil Langerman, addressed the city municipal of Vienna with a request or as a requirement to remove a plaque for Ivan Franko that was installed in the University of Vienna, and Franko was doing his PhD in University of Vienna. And the reason was, according to the Langerman, that Franko is very known anti-Semitic writer. And basically his claim was that Franko texts served as inspiration for those Ukrainians who took part in the Holocaust later on. So then from this kind of scandal, whatever kind of controversy, it gave a boost to a special conference that was held in Vienna, in the Vienna University 2013, which was basically discussing to what extent we could really, how could we qualify Franko, whether he was really anti-Semite or Philo-Semite. And there is a very good book which emerged over this project. I believe if somebody is interesting, want to go into detail, on the reading list, this book will be on the top. It's about Ivan Franko and Jewish relations. So what I'm trying to say, that Franko still rocks, in the sense that we are discussing his legacy is not just kind of academic interest, but because it's very much in nowadays public and political. Then, if you want to somehow characterize Franko's views on Jewish issue, so let me start with a kind of not just anecdote, but the story that throughout his lifetime, Franko was quite often referred as a Jew, not a Ukrainian. There are gossips, and there was gossip not just amongst, say, kind of, everyday people, but his friends, socialists, especially from the Russian Empire. That, as a matter of fact, he was really a Jew, and his name was not Ivan Franko, but Joe Frankel, and he was just converted to Ukrainian because he married Ukrainian woman. The reason for such a gossip was very simple, because Franko was known for his Philo-Semitism. If you read Franko text, what strikes you is what great sympathy he describes the Jews, Galician Jews, but Jews also they applied their faith in all this kind of Eastern Europe. So this kind of paradigmatic. But there's just one part of the story. The other part of the story, that and this is kind of when I was writing on my book on Franko, I discovered some overtly anti-Semitic texts, unashamedly anti-Semitic texts. thankfully, he never undersigned it. So actually, it was like an anonymous text. It was published in some Ukrainian newspapers at that time, and that gives us some kind of paradox. How could you both very philo-Semitic and at the same time has a kind of some anti-Semitic text? So I believe it takes the historian to make this sense of a nonsense. So my first answer to this kind of paradox would be that let's judge Franko in the terms of his times, 19th century. Basically, for the 19th century, it was not quite a rare, I would say quite a norm for such an ambivalency, that a person could have views which contradict each other. This kind of 19th century ambivalence. And this is quite normal, especially for many intellectuals. In these terms, Franko was perfect man of the 19th century. So therefore, we have to judge him by the terms of his time. But this is very general remark, because we have to get deeper. So my second answer is exactly what Professor Serhii Plokhy was addressing. We have to put Franko in the larger comparative context. So if you look for somebody who is the same stance like Franko in Polish, German, Austrian, Jewish tradition, it's relatively easy, because he was at that time rather known person, has a very personal contact, so we could put in his friends and colleagues whom we know. Among them is Tomasz Masaryk, the future Czechoslovak president, or Emilia Orzeszkowa, the famous Polish writer, or Victor Adler, at that time leader of the Austrian Social Democrat, and then one of the founding fathers of the Austrian interwar republic. Again, as I'm saying, this is not just a figure, abstract figure, this is figure that Franko know very well, who correspond with them, and they exchange this view. What strikes, if you make this kind of comparison, that each one of them has some anti-Semitic text. And sometimes they admitted it, sometimes it's not. But basically the story is, it's again 19th century. But 19th century, anti-Semitism was not kind of exception, I hate to say it, but rather a norm. Heiko Haumann, a rather famous Swiss historian who wrote about East European Jews, wrote a very nice article in which he basically used the famous quotation from the Franz Joseph, the emperor, the Austrian emperor at the time. Wir waren alle ein klein wenig antisemitisch, which means we all were to some extent anti-Semitic. So what I'm saying is not to just expropriate Franko or just venerate him, whatever, but just to say that in this context, anti-Semitism was not quite rare, which is, I hate to say, was some kind of norm, especially for intellectuals. So therefore, you have to put in some larger context what kind of anti-Semitism was there. So my next answer would be, this was so-called progressive anti-Semitism. It was not 19th century, 20th century anti-Semitism of the kind Holocaust character. It was anti-Semitism that has most to do with Karl Marx, that Adolf Hitler. We have to be reminded to what extent Karl Marx was a virulent anti-Semite. And his anti-Semite not rational, but rather coming from his class theory, because what he was frustrated, angry with the Jews, that Jews make some kind of traditional community, which does not use more solidarity among the poor and rich Jews than the more poor Jews and other Jews, let's say Gentile Jews, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole trend. And actually, if you look at this trend, you have many figures of this type, including, as a kind of paradoxically, Victor Adler, who himself is converted Jew, but at the same time, he is a leader of Austrian Social Democrat, he is Marxist, and also criticizing Jews specifically from this point of view. So what I'm saying here, Franko fits perfectly this pattern of progressive anti-Semitism, so that we have to judge him from this perspective. But basically, if talking about this intellectual sins, this is a sense of his youth. When he was under age 30, 35, and he was very much kind of the spell of the Marxists. Later on, when he moved from left to right, and he became very critical of the Marxism, you couldn't trace any sign of the anti-Semitism. So this runs against the kind of general conclusion that more national you are, the more anti-Semitic you are. That doesn't work in case of Franko. The less Marxist, the more national he becomes, the less anti-Semitic he becomes. Actually, not less anti-Semitic, because we don't know any text which could have some kind of anti-Semitic anti-Semitic connotation like we have in before. So, and then I come to the final point. So what Franko sees, and it's actually very natural, he doesn't see his Jewish community as some kind of homogeneous community. There's varieties of the Jews in his works, in his fine works, bell letters, also in his academic works. He see them very distinctively, each of this group. And for sure, as a Frankai, being Marxist, is very much sympathetic to this, what is called Jewish proletariat, Jewish poor, and so on and so forth. But then again, when he looks in his later, and he's very critical of so-called Jewish exploiters, Jewish capitalists. But in his later phase of his life, he is positive both for poor and rich. If you look on this kind of his several editions of probably one of his most famous novel that has a Jewish character, boa constrictor, you could see this kind of the evolution, because at the final final version of this story and other stories, he portrays the Jewish entrepreneurs in capital, so to say, in very positive way. So why Franko is still paradigmatic? Because we couldn't now talk about Jewish proletariat, Jewish capitalists, it's all 19th century. What is still held true in Franko, makes core, which still matters for us. It's exactly why Franko defines how could we frame Ukrainian-Jewish relation in positive terms? How could we reconcile to those groups? And here, strikingly, he is very close to Theodor Herzl, because he basically sees the key to solution in similar coexistence, parallel coexistence of Jewish Zionism and Ukrainian democratic nationalism, and he sees them as a kind of twin brothers. Even so, it's not probably twin brothers would not be exactly the good term, because he sees Herzl and Zionism as a model or as a type to emulate for Ukrainians. And therefore, one of the most striking episodes of his biography was a kind of reaction, which was a very fast reaction, few weeks, that he published review of Theodor Herzl Jüdischer Staat, practically in few weeks, so to say. And this review was extremely positive. And basically what he says that yes, from the judging from our times, what Herzl describes, it's beyond any reality. It's not, could be implemented, but even more so, because in reality, we have to strive for it. Because exactly Herzl shows us the way, shows the example to follow. Because by that time, Ukrainian state was also beyond any kind of reality. But say it's totally beyond reality, you have to follow this. So in short, let me conclude. What Franko did, and I believe what still matters for us, is that he stood very clearly for a Jewish anti-imperial choice. This is choice which has been described by the Professor Petrovsky Stern, and which basically is relative to 20th century. There's emergence of the trend among first Jews of the Jewish relation in Ukraine, which they tend to sympathize in the fight with Ukrainian case. And this is exactly what Franko was trying to do. So kind of coexistence of two separate nations, friendly, but not as a kind of traditional societies, not as just peasants and traditional Jews, but something which will be very, very much modern. So in this sense, strikingly so, what Franko did in the 19th century resonates very much what we have now as a kind of experience, specifically in 20th century, and more so in after Ukraine became independent, specifically during the second Maidan, when they feel this kind of emergence of the Ukrainian Jewish identity, and which Ukrainian Jewish Encounter is part of this kind of discourse. So what I'm saying here, we don't need to be hagiographic about Franko. Franko was a very complex figure. He was not controversial, but a complex figure. So, but still, we have to study him, because in a way, he still remains to be paradigmatic for Ukrainian Jewish relations. So we have to study Franko in his time to see what is living and what is death. What is that from the perspective of our time, And my final guess is that it's much more living than that. That still holds true in Franco. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hrytsak. Yes, you talked about paradox, and I would say probably for me, you discovered two paradoxes. One, of course, this the alleged incompatibility of the philo-Semitic and quote unquote anti-Semitic views, but also this evolution in Franco from left to the right, and again, you expect more anti-Semitism on the right, and certainly Franco's case doesn't support that particular argument. It's my pleasure to turn the floor now to Professor Moskovich, his presentation on Franco and on this comparative lives and comparative views of Franco and Jabotinsky.
Well, I would like to underline the fact that Professor Hrytsak and some of his colleagues in Ukraine have done a lot in order to put the work of Franco in the right context and to study it before any kind of misunderstanding could arise outside Ukraine on the character of writing of Franco and accusations him of anti-Semitism. Among these colleagues, the first perhaps to mention is Professor Grabovich, who started it rather early, already in the first conference in 1983 in McMaster's University. He writes about works of Ivan Franko and his description of Jews. And then Roman Mnich, who is now in Poland, working, also writing about the literary side of Franco's work. Franco, without any kind of doubt, is one of the main figures of Ukrainian intellectual pantheon. Anybody who reads him is impressed by the greatness of this thinker and writer. He worked actually in many genres, almost all the genres. He was a polymath. And there is no doubt that we are dealing here with the intellectual of European and world stature. In Israel and among the Jews, there is a lot of interest to Ivan Franko. There is, however, a problem here. The study of Franko, both in Ukraine and outside Ukraine, is only at its beginning. And Franko is not translated quite well into other languages. Therefore, people who want to get an idea about his writings, they don't know everything, everything that of his inheritance. So there is here a need now, perhaps, to make Franko more known outside Ukraine. In this respect, I have hope that the translation of Professor Hrytsak's book, Franko and his contemporaries, will perhaps help to enhance the knowledge on Franko and the image of Franko outside Ukraine. So in Israel, the situation with the attitude Franko is different, perhaps from other places outside Ukraine, because we have here about 500,000 people who came out of the Soviet Union, and particularly 500,000 coming from Ukraine. The whole amount is much larger. They, according to the program of schools in Ukraine, had to study Franko and to study his texts. And like my esteemed colleagues, Professor Plokhy and Professor Hrytsak, I also got through a school in Ukraine, Ukrainian school, and I studied by heart Franko. And we as a population here in Israel, part of Israeli population, we have knowledge of Franko already before we came to Israel. So with this audience, with these people, there is a lot of positive attitude towards Franko and appreciation of Franko as one of the greatest Ukrainians. Therefore, it is easy to work among these people on Franko. So when we started the Association of Ukrainian Studies in Israel, one of our founding members, who was Dr. Asher Wilcher, suggested that our association should be called Ivan Franko Association, or the name of Ivan Franko. So high is the esteem for Ivan Franko in the circle of immigrants from Ukraine, and particularly among the Slavists who come from Ukraine and who work on Ukrainian literature. We have started here a series of books with the aim of developing relations between Israeli Jews and Slavic people from all Slavic nations. The series is called Jews and Slavs. There are 27 already volumes. Here is volume number 25, which is supported by, sponsored by the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter. And there are many more volumes. This volume is particularly on Ukrainian dimension. It is Ukrainian Jewish cultural relations. And in addition to it, in almost every volume, and we have 27, there are articles on Ukrainian subjects, Ukrainian Jewish relations particularly. And for us, Franko is very important because he was the one who started actually from the Ukrainian side the whole the discussion of all the problems of Ukrainian Jewish relations. He introduced actually one of those who introduced the field. So in volume number 1 already we have a first article by a outstanding specialist in Ukrainian studies, who is the winner of the prize of Ivan Franko. Her name is Magdalena Laszlo-Hrytsak from Romania, who everybody thinks that she is Hungarian. She is not, she's Jewish. And she wrote a very interesting paper on the image of the Jew in Franko's writings. Then we have publications by Asher Wilcher, a very interesting scholar who actually, he was an Israeli diplomat stationed in Ottawa and started to write his dissertation, particularly passed it in Ottawa. His subject was the poem Moses by Ivan Franko, where he shows that the figure of Moses was for Franko a kind of a model of how the Ukrainian people should be to freedom, from slavery to freedom. We have in this series lots of such materials on the subject. Unfortunately, they are not well known in Ukraine, and I would like that they should be more known with time. Perhaps it will happen. I already spoke about the accusations of Franko as an anti-Semite, that he is as if he's an anti-Semite, at the conference of 2010 on which Professor Hrytsak spoke. I was there and I categorically stated there that Franko in no case was an anti-Semite. His views are quite complex. They developed with time. As Professor Hrytsak said, at the beginning there were anti-Semitic motives, but with time the emphasis was shifted, and his views became on this subject. They changed became softer or milder, or he started to speak more out in this. For sure, he didn't express his attitude to Jews, he expressed it in written form, but he didn't, for example, went out against a mob of pogromists like Volodymyr Korolenko, who was almost lynched by a mob of black hundreds in 1905. But Ukraine actually had a number of people, of intellectuals who stood for Jews and defended their rights. Started from Shevchenko, who signed the letter of 1858 in defense actually of the rights of Jews. Franko in this line has a very important place. I think that if we want to work forward in the field of Israeli of Jewish Ukrainian relations, we have to refer to his work, and it should be a starting point from where we can build our mutual understanding. Now, I would like to add on the subject on which I was supposed to speak more, but it is, you can read it in the paper, about Franko and Jabotinsky. If on the Ukrainian side, Franko is the most important person in this subject of Ukrainian Jewish understanding, on the Jewish side, this is Jabotinsky. And they have a lot of common. They were both working in the directions, starting, so to say, trying to meet somewhere in the middle. And Jabotinsky, who as a young colleague of Franko, he knew about all his writings. He certainly read Franko, though I don't think that they ever met. And what was common in their view was that Jews should be given equal rights in the places of the diaspora where they live, in particular Ukraine, and also that the solution of the Jewish problem in Ukraine is perhaps immigration of Jews to Israel, the Zionist dream. So, in fact, Franko was one of those who supported Zionism most of perhaps other Ukrainian, more than other Ukrainian intellectuals of that time. So the parallels in their views are quite striking, and it means that there is common ground, and there was at that time common ground for finding a common language between the two peoples. Of the newest papers that were written on the subject, an interesting contribution is a paper by Stokolos Voronchuk, Olena, who is not only a scholar, but also a deputy head of Lviv district administration. She writes about one of the most problematic works of Franko, and she tries to interpret it in modern terms. And I would agree with Professor Hrytsak that when you speak about Franko, you have to judge him and interpret him in terms of his own time. To do it from today, from the points of today and problems today, is a bit, I would say, questionable. I wouldn't do it. I would do it in the context of the times when he wrote and when he developed his thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Moskovich. Again, for both parts of your presentations on talking about reception of Franko in Israel, in academic communities in particular, but also comparison between Franko and Jabotinsky. And my first question will be about these different contexts, and in particular the different audiences to which Franko writes and Jabotinsky as well. But one, Professor Moskovich, one thing that I certainly remember very vividly from your paper is that you put there a question about whether Franko really modified or changed his message, depending on the audience that he addressed. And you write that it looks like the anti-Semitic text would be, or quote unquote anti-Semitic text would be mostly written in Ukrainian, when philo-Semitic would be written in German or Polish. You put there a question mark, so you put this as a suggestion. This is not a statement. But I wanted to start our discussion with that. To what degree, really, what Franko in particular is saying depends on whom he addresses, in terms of not only the way how he frames the argument, but also the message itself.
Some of his works on this subject are written in Polish, and most of them are written in Ukrainian. His bell letter, for sure, are written in Ukrainian. And what I had in mind was that most of what we read on the subject of whatever description of Jews and relation to Jews and solution of the Jewish problem is found in Ukrainian and not in Polish. The Polish actually aspect at a certain time of his biography, it was views that is not absolutely clear whether they belonged to him exactly or they belonged to the whole society of people who were considered to be like brothers in the circle of the magazine Przegląd Społeczny. They were shared by a number of people of this circle. So they were worked out in a kind of a discussion between these people, starting with the article of Alfred Nozick, and then a number of people joined, and there was a kind of scandal also connected with it after that with Karpel Lippe. But in any case, that was another circle, quite a limited circle of people. As far as writing in Ukrainian, that was his prosaic work, his poetic works. Certainly there were, although some of these works he wrote also because he was quite free, he could write freely, and he wrote a lot in Polish and German. Some of it is written in Polish, particularly his publicistic works. So I would say it's different audiences for sure, because the Ukrainian audience was quite different from the Polish audience. It's absolutely clear. I don't know how many sections, certain kind, because part of his Ukrainian colleagues were also active in Polish letters as well. So there was this aspect as well.
Should I answer this question as well? I couldn't hear you. Serhii,
yes, thank you. I was muted. So yes, absolutely. Please continue this discussion.
So I do concur with Professor Moskovich. I just have probably some footnotes here that we couldn't put on the same standing the anti-Semitic and philo-Semitic works of Franko, because the anti-Semitic text, as far as you know, there's only two, and two of them are not signed by Franko, which also a message that he was not willing to sign this paper. But again, if you look on the philo-Semitic side, there are dozens of texts of Franko. So I'm saying it could be put on the same balance. This is like a tiny diplet, and there's like the larger volume, so to say. For sure, those two small anti-Semitic texts doesn't make big honor for Franko, but then I concur with Professor Moskovich that they was written for particular reasons, because it was been published in the two leading newspapers and magazines, which aim to be specifically for mass usage, so-called entering the mass politics, and one of the address was a peasantry at that time. So actually addressing peasantry, but this kind of anti-Semitic rhetoric has a large mobilizing effect. I hate to say, but it was true. If you look on the other paper of the type, Batkivshchina, which was actually founded by the Ukrainian radicals, leftists, you'll be surprised to what extent anti-Semitic it is. Again, anti-Semitic same exploiters, this kind of rich Jews. But again, they use this. A kind of much leftist, very much leftist rhetoric. But that said again, Franko is very hard to put in national, character, so to say, because Franko had much more complex relation with Ukrainian community than have with Jews. Because for some point, Franko, from some large period of time, Franko was practically banned for Ukrainian public space. And for 10 years, he was writing intensely for the Polish magazine newspapers. And therefore, paradoxically, he was referred as a Polish poet and Polish writer than Ukrainian writer. So again, the Przegląd Społeczny, the case that Professor Moskovich referred, probably the most famous, this was not exactly either Polish or Ukrainian. It was rather bilingual, mostly Polish, but some kind of Ukrainian text as well. But importantly, it was not national. It's probably the last international magazine which has a Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, and Jewish writers. This kind of international in small form. And this was the podium when they raised for the first time Jewish issue in Galician larger space. What was attributed to Franko in this text, Przegląd Społeczny, as anti-Semitic, the Karl Lippe, the famous the pamphlet that was addressing Franko specifically. Paradoxically, what Franko was saying and attacking anti-Semitic was not exactly his points. This was a point that he borrowed from the Alfred Nossig text, which was the text which started the whole discussion. So again, as I'm saying here, I'm getting to my first point. The situation is really very much complex. It's a typically 19th century situation. It's really hard to draw a clear-cut line, so to say. So again, if you want to address Franko, the complexity is the first road.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, in terms of complexities, I have one question that comes really from my background in early modern history, in the history of 17th and 18th century. And what I noticed there that the terms like anti-Semitism or philo-Semitic don't work for the 17th and 18th century. It's basically, I was struggling looking for the right terms in terms of anti-Judaism, for example, and again, religion was very important part of the story there. And the questions about the progressive anti-Semitism or a sort of a class criticism or antagonism toward the Jewish community, the question that I had whether we are not oversimplifying things, but by having these just two categories, Semitic and philo-Semitic and anti-Semitic, and maybe there is a room for more nuanced look and analysis, and again, from contexts, from cause views, but also when it comes to the that wide variety of terms can serve us better in terms of understanding Ukrainian Jewish relations during that period. I wonder if, again, I saw that Professor Hrytsak, it looks like Slavko, you wanted to contribute to that, and again,
This is exactly what I'm working on, and I wrote a paper to that effect, that you have to be very careful with choosing terms. Because yes, quite right, anti-Semitic is very much 20th century term, and even anti-Semitism, which emerged by the end of the 19th century, is quite different type that the anti-Semitism 20th century. In a short way, there is no direct line between anti-Semitism of 19th century and anti-Semitism of 20th century, especially Holocaust type, which has been noticed and marked by many historians, nothing really quite new. What is important here, I would rather use the term Judophobia or Judophilia as a more appropriate term. Because at that time, emerged already public sphere with a famous Wilhelm Marr brochure in the end of the 70s, 80s, but this is not still very much common term. Because anti-Semitism is still an ism, it's ideology, which means has a kind of arguments, all the kind of things. And you don't have it at that time, because most they have attitudes, popular attitudes. So my point is that if you want to describe attitudes of the Ukrainian, or rather Ruthenian society at that time, because again, you have to use the proper term Ruthenians, which is ethnic rather than nation, designation. So if he looks on the kind of the sources that are available, this is mostly proverbs and songs, you would see to what extent the anti-Jewish image is persistent there, is strong. Actually, Jew is an absolute other in the imagination of the local society. There is no links between us and them. Them are Jews. Even lords are closer to us than Jews. So again, and I believe this is exactly what Franko has to fight with. Because in his task, Jews are not them. There's a other them. Them are exploiters, capitalists, Russian Empire, Poles, elites, whatever, but not Jews per se. So what Franko tries to do, and also it's paradigmatic because others do the same, he trying to reconfigure it, so to say, to put Jews as the others in terms of the phobia, to make it closer to us, so to say. Because for a variety of the reason, this Ukrainian progressive nationalism, if I may say so, didn't envisage Jews as the enemy. For the enemy was the other. And this was a very enormous task. It's hard to complete. And then again, if you look at the text of the end of the 19th century, at that time, Franko was a leader of Ukrainian Radical Party, which is kind of mixture between the agrarian socialism and Marxism. I was lucky to find, I had the chance to find some kind of text written by the ordinary members of this party. And you will be shocked to what extent they are anti-Semitic, like a peasant. What Franko writes, a pamphlet, specific pamphlet, how we should address the Jews. And he says we have to address Jews exclusively positive terms. And you see the kind of difference. How this elite, in a technical term, intellectual elite like Franko, try to reconfigure all this kind of the discussion from the kind of traditional form, when Jews are enemies and the other, to the time of the public modern discourse, where Jews are not enemies, but they are close to us. They are similar to us. They are different, but they not, in a way, they are not enemy because the enemy are some others. So this again, I'm saying about the complexity. So actually I have to extend that anti-Semitism doesn't quite fit this kind of situation. And more so, if you to appreciate the efforts of Franco and people like him to reconfigure this kind of image of a Jew from traditional, which is rather negative, to modern, which was very, very much positive.
Okay. So Moskovich, would you want to comment on that?
Well, it's a very complicated thing on a level on which I am not able to go so high as to discuss, such abstract notions. But I would say that there is a problem with the term progressive anti-Semitism. In Polish, anti-Semitism postępowy, because what happens today of contemporary problems of today, where it is absolutely clear what is progressive anti-Semitism, what's understood today by progressive, and what is in difference to other anti-Semitism. Progressive anti-Semitism today is anti-Semitism of the left circles. By using progressive anti-Semitism to in the context of Franko is a bit, to me, problematic, and I would think we have to look for some kind of change of terms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I have a question for Natalia in terms of it's 11:06.
Right. So we can, if you would like, and we can edit this out, but we can then, if you want to ask another question, or we can just wrap it up. It's up to you. Do you have anything else that you?
Maybe I can ask one question that I was really very interested in what Wolf said about Jabotinsky and Franko basically having a common platform in, on the one hand, supporting the idea of Zionism and creation of a Jewish state somewhere else, not apparently in Eastern Europe or not in Ukraine. On the other hand, the idea was that the Jews, where they live, they have to have equal rights with the population. And the question that I have is that it's very easy to see that kind of approach in the hands of anti-Semites, or maybe some form of that trend, to use it in a way of actually advocating expulsion of the Jews. And I wonder whether how both of the authors, how they deal with that issue, how they basically advocate for the creation of a Jewish state at the same time advocating for the rights of Jews in the places where they stay. So again, I don't know, maybe they didn't see the contradiction between the two. Again, that is quite possible, or maybe they tried to address it in some way.
The situation is the following. If we go to Jabotinsky distinguished two kinds of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism of circumstances, where the circumstances are such that they produce anti-Semitism, and there is no way out of it. And the second kind of anti-Semitism of people. And he says that the conditions in Ukraine are such that in Ukraine exists this kind of anti-Semitism of circumstances. Jews are put in a situation which is absolutely impossible, because the ruling government would, if the Russian imperial, whatever it is, empire, or the Poles, or possible situation where they can't survive by not being engaged in this kind of professions and operating in the ways in which they operate, which inevitably causes hate of the surrounding population. So the anti-Semitism of circumstances is such that there is no other way for Jews to survive there, but only to leave this place. And all of it, and the idea of Zionism came after the trial of Dreyfus in France, where Herzl saw for the first time this kind of situation, where there was no way out, but the only way out was to create their own state and not for the Jews and not to try to survive in this impossible kind of a situation which they were. And this concerns also Galicia, for example. There are several papers of Jabotinsky on particularly situation in Galicia. And when he describes what's going on in Galicia, it is almost the same text as you see in Franko. It's absolutely, it's the same poverty, it's the same exploitation of the Ukrainian peasant who is even more poor than the Jews themselves, and things like that. So there is this kind of impossible situation which there should be a solution. In this case, Franko, as a great person and a great visionary, he saw it ahead. What could happen? There'll be a big tragedy there, because if circumstances will change, in any kind of future explosion, Jews will be the first who will suffer for it. And Jabotinsky saw exactly the same, absolutely the same picture. And that's why the solution was, for both of them, was one of the solutions was Jabotinsky absolutely clear immigration. For Franko for him, the immigration was one of the solutions, one partial solution, because part of the Jews, they, under certain circumstances, if they identify with the Ukrainians and work with the Ukrainians, in Ukrainian interests and all that, and change their ways and all that. And the other way is immigration, but where to immigrate, he didn't say so at some part of his time. And another times after the appearance of Herzl's book, he said Palestine is one of the places. Now, Serhii, I understand the depth of your inquiry, of your question. And the depth is the following, that couldn't it be considered, this kind of approach, as anti-Semitic? Yes, it can. Jabotinsky, in trying to save the Jewry of Poland in its borders of 1930, before 1939, he used all kinds of means, and he contacted with the Beck government in Poland, where they were absolutely clearly anti-Semitic. And nevertheless, he was cooperating with them because any means for him was good in order to get the Jews out of danger. And at that time, he was many times actually accused of collaborating with anti-Semites and with Ukrainians, and because he had an agreement with, as you know, with Petlura of 1921. He was, for that, he suffered a lot for it. And then there was a lot of misunderstanding during the process of Schwarzbart in Paris, where again, he was criticized by Jewish community. And on this particular case as well, there was accusation that he collaborates with the anti-Semites. Moreover, gave also arms, they armed certain groups of Palestinians, Palestine, whatever it is, you can call it, terrorists, you can call them partisans or whatever, who worked against the British government in Palestine. Again, anti-Semites were arming the Jews. So the whole question is quite problematic, I would say. And for sure, if we judge, let's say, people who supported the Zionist idea because of some considerations of their own, there may be this kind of thought or accusation that they do it not because they like Jews, but if they want to get rid of it. Why the Polish government supported Jabotinsky? Because they wanted to get rid of Jews. That's absolutely clear. and why there should have been this kind of, let's say, desire to get rid of Jews, because there were too many Jews in a certain place, and particularly one of these places was Eastern Galicia, where simply the land couldn't support so many people in the role of middlemen. And therefore, they had to find some other place for these people. There is another also subject here, is the subject of colonization. Because at a certain time, the organization, which was called Alliance Israélite in France, it came out with an idea after the pogroms in Russia in 1881 to solve the situation of the Jews in the eastern part of Ukraine by settling them in the western part of Ukraine in Galicia. And Franko was categorically against it. And on another occasion, it was this idea of the Soviet government to put the Jews in the Crimea. And Jabotinsky was categorically again against this settlement. For different reasons, Franko and Jabotinsky, but they were against this kind of oversaturation of Jews in a certain place, and the proper solution of the Jewish problem, so to say, in Galicia and in Ukraine was the establishment of their own state in Palestine.
So I basically concur with the arguments and conclusions of Professor Moskovich. I would like just to make some minor caveats. First of all, a few years ago, there appeared a biography of Theodor Herzl written by Shlomo Avinieri. And he shows there, and I believe he shows persuasively, that Herzl's shift of views had very little to do with Dreyfus affair. Because basically, this was the story that he invented later on. Basically, Herzl was reflecting upon the Jewish issue in the Austrian Empire. And first of all, in the regions like Galicia and his native Hungary. So what was particular for this region? We have to somehow shift from the ideological, whatever issues, but focus on the economic dimension. This is exactly what Franko did. Because basically, this was the poorest region of Austria and also poorest region probably of whole Europe. The nickname from Galicia was misery, Galician misery. The local Jews was called Galicianers, but which means also the poorest, the most stubborn, the most traditional Jews, which were very much disliked by other Jews like Litvaks or Jews in Vienna. So what I'm saying here, you have this kind of situation when the two large communities, Ruthenian and Ukraine and the Jewish community, they are actually, they are limited. They found themselves in the struggle for very limited resources, specifically in the terms of the transformation. So in this sense, what Franko saw, that if this would continue, the tensions would grow and they would very easily erupt into some kind of violence. There's, by the way, very interesting book by the younger Polish historian Sławomir Tokarski, who is trying to conceptualize the Jewish non-Gentile relations in Galicia. And basically says, yes, it was not forget it. So in a sense, Franko didn't see immediate solution. It was beyond any possibilities. Because when two communities fighting for very limited resources, two very poor, you could expect the worst case scenario. What Franko did, it was a vision, so to say, exactly. And the vision was migration of Jews, and very much like Jabotinsky, in a sense, Franko was Zionist before Herzl, like other Jewish intellectuals in Galicia, which is not Panikar, also Alfred Mosek. But what Franko did, and this is particular Ukrainian, Franko, and Galician solution, which you couldn't find any other ways. The thing is, the Jews were never regarded as an ethnic community, not even nation in the Austrian Empire. They were never reflected, there was never kind of a category of some specific group. They were mostly considered as religious group. no census has marked them as a group. They were mostly either German by language or Mosaic confession by their religion. So what Franko did, and others followed, he was the first to require, to demand that Jews should be admitted, accepted as a nation. And this is exactly the famous case that the Ukrainian delegation and the Reichsrat and the Vienna parliament was the first to put the issue that Jews should be recognized as a nation, particularly in Galicia, because it gave another solution, because somehow it elevated the tension, because what added to this kind of the fight for limited resources, also the case that many Jews, specifically those who assimilated, the kind of secular Jews, they moved to the Polish nationality, which exacerbated the situation. So to stop it, in the meantime, what they suggested, stop assimilation. Just be who you are, be a Jew, be a nation Jew. And this, I believe, is a particular Ukrainian answer to Jewish relation, particular in the sense that nobody else in Austrian Empire has suggested such relation. In this sense, I believe this is something that we have to credit Franko and also his later colleagues for this specific Ukrainian installation, which comes from this specific Austrian, particular Galician Austrian milieu.
Thank you very much, Professor Hrytsak. We have really very interesting discussion, and I can't tell about you, but I certainly would be happy to continue it. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I'm sure that we'll continue it in our academic settings, but also more importantly in our publications. And I want to thank the UJE for really organizing that and providing this platform, BookForum, and the participants of the discussion, Professor Hrytsak and Professor Moskovich. At the end, I will do something that I was planning to do all the way, abuse my position as a moderator and advertise Yaroslav Hrytsak's book, Ivan Franko and Community, given that it's a joint product of Academic Press, the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, and Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. It is specifically on Franko, and it certainly pays a lot of attention to Franko's attitude toward the Jews, and puts Franko Jews, Ukrainians, in a really broad context. So there is more than just world in which the main character of the book writes, works, and creates. So thank you once again for taking part in this discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank
And
you.
if I could say a few words also, thank you very much for this very interesting discussion, which is, I think, also very relevant for our times. I wanted to say that I invite everybody to visit our website, UkrainianJewishEncounter.org, where you can also not only learn more about our organization, but read Professor Moskovich's essay, and also learn about a new initiative that we launched this year. Very excited about it, along with the BookForum, and it's called Encounter, the Ukrainian Jewish Literary Prize. I invite you to visit us on Facebook. And once again, I just wanted to say that this panel took place within the framework of the 27th Lviv International BookForum, with the support of UJE and the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation. So thank you all for taking the time and for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.